From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one. Will you spend the rest of your life with me?
Yes, oh yes, I will.
As the first light of dawn touched the mountain valley, a warm golden glow spread across the new wooden farmhouse. After months of hard work, Toan finally stood back to admire the farm he had built with his own hands: neat vegetable rows, a small flower garden by the porch, and orderly animal pens. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. Toan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace he had worked so hard for fill his heart. But today, his happiness was not just about the farm. Today, he was going to ask Ly Tu Diem to be his wife. Toan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small red cloth box. Inside was a simple silver ring, saved carefully from months of hard work, every coin from selling vegetables, every bamboo shoot and medicinal herb gathered in the forest had contributed to this moment. Holding the box, he thought of all the difficult days they had shared. Climbing mountains together, cold forest mornings, times when money was scarce. Through it all, Diem had stayed by his side, believing in him even when he doubted himself. Tonight, he would finally tell her that his heart, and his future, belonged to her. Ly Tu Diem returned from the forest behind the mountain. In her hands was a woven basket filled with fresh bamboo shoots and carefully picked medicinal herbs. Her clothes were simple and worn from work. A few strands of hair had escaped from the ribbon tied behind her head. Tiny drops of sweat glistened on her face, yet she still looked incredibly beautiful. The moment she stepped into the yard, she stopped. Her eyes widened in surprise. The new farm was glowing under soft golden string lights. Wildflowers had been arranged beautifully around the entrance. She turned to Toan with confusion and warmth in her eyes. "On Toan, what happened today?" Toan simply smiled. A gentle smile filled with love. "Come inside first." Added scene, for a brief moment, Diem stood still, taking in every detail around her. The lights shimmered like stars fallen from the sky, and the flowers along the path swayed softly in the evening breeze. Her tiredness from the long day in the forest seemed to melt away. Something about the atmosphere felt different, warmer, softer, almost dreamlike. When she looked at Toan, she noticed the tenderness in his eyes, a quiet excitement he was trying hard to hide. Her heart began to race without knowing why. Deep inside, she could feel that this night would become one of the most unforgettable moments of her life. Inside the wooden house, a warm dinner had already been prepared. The table was covered with all the dishes she loved most. Roasted chicken, fresh mountain vegetables, bamboo shoot soup, and a bowl of steaming white rice. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm and romantic light across the room. Ly Tu Diem looked at him, deeply moved. "You prepared all of this for me?" Toan nodded softly. His voice was calm, yet filled with meaning. "Because today is a very special day." As they sat down together, the room felt warmer than ever before. Outside, the cool mountain wind brushed against the wooden walls, but inside, the candlelight wrapped them in comfort and tenderness. Diem could feel the care in every dish on the table. It was not only dinner, it was love prepared by hand. Toan kept glancing at her, quietly admiring the way the soft light reflected in her eyes. Every smile she gave him made his heart beat faster. The simple wooden house, once only a dream, now felt like the beginning of a beautiful future. As they sat together, the conversation slowly turned into memories. The first days they met. The mornings spent climbing the hills together. The rainy nights inside the old leaking house. The days when money was scarce and life was difficult. And yet, through every hardship, they had always had each other. Ly Tu Diem smiled gently. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Deep in her heart, she could already feel that tonight was going to change everything. They laughed softly as old memories came rushing back. The days when they shared a single bowl of rice. The moments when they sat close together by the fire on stormy nights. Even the hardest times now felt precious because they had faced them side by side. Diem looked at Toan and saw not only the man in front of her, but every version of him from the past, the exhausted young farmer, the dreamer who never gave up, and the man who loved her with all his heart. Her chest tightened with emotion, as if happiness was slowly blooming inside her. After dinner, Toan gently took her hand. Without saying much, he led her outside. The moment she stepped into the yard, she froze. Above them, the sky was filled with stars. Hundreds of tiny golden lights decorated the fences, flower beds, and the large tree standing in the middle of the yard. A pathway made of flower petals stretched ahead. The wind moved softly through the fields. Everything felt like a dream. The petals beneath her feet released a faint sweet fragrance as they walked. Each step made her heart beat a little faster. The lights twinkled around them like stars brought down from the sky just for this night. In the distance, the mountain stood quietly under the moonlight, as if guarding this beautiful moment. Diem looked around in amazement, feeling as though she had stepped into a fairy tale. She turned to Toan, and in the softness of his expression, she could already sense that something deeply meaningful was about to happen. They stopped beneath the large tree. Toan turned to face her. His eyes locked onto hers. Diem, ever since you came into my life, everything changed. You stayed with me through every hardship. You walked beside me when I had nothing. He looked around the farm. This place. This dream. It was never only mine. It belongs to both of us. Tears immediately filled her eyes. His voice carried a warmth that made every word sink straight into her heart. Diem could hear the sincerity in every breath he took. She remembered every difficult moment they had survived together, and suddenly those memories no longer felt painful. Instead, they felt beautiful. They were proof of a love that had endured storms, hunger, and uncertainty. As the wind gently moved through the tree branches above them, it felt as though even nature itself was listening to his confession. The warm lights hanging from the tree branches swayed gently in the mountain breeze. Toan held both of her hands. His voice trembled slightly. Do you remember the first day we met? I had nothing. Just an old wooden house, a few chickens, and barren land. But you still chose to stay. He lifted her hands closer to his chest, letting her feel the rapid beat of his heart. His eyes glistened, filled with gratitude and love. Every sentence he spoke felt like a piece of his soul laid bare before her. Diem's tears fell silently now, touched by the depth of his feelings. She had never needed riches or grand promises, only his heart. And tonight, he was giving her all of it. The farm around them stood as a living witness to every sacrifice they had made together. Toan took a deep breath. Then slowly, he knelt down. At that moment, the world seemed to stand still. He carefully took out the red velvet ring box. The moment he opened it, the silver ring sparkled beautifully under the golden lights. Diem's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she looked at him kneeling before her. Tears blurred her vision, yet the ring still shone clearly like a promise made under the stars. Her heart felt full, almost too full to contain the emotions rushing through it. This was the moment every hardship had led them to. Every storm, every tear, every sacrifice had brought them here. The night suddenly felt sacred, unforgettable. Will you marry me? Will you build this farm with me? Will you build a family with me? His voice softened with every question, filled with hope and vulnerability. The sincerity in his eyes left no room for doubt. Diem looked at the home they had built together, the fields they had planted with their own hands, and the man who had loved her through everything. In that moment, she saw not only the present, but a lifetime ahead, harvest seasons, children's laughter, warm dinners, and peaceful mornings by his side. Her heart had already answered long before her lips did. Tears streamed down her face. Then, through tears, she nodded. Yes. Yes, I will. The words left her lips like a whisper, but to Toan, they sounded louder than anything he had ever heard. Happiness washed over him like a wave. Diem smiled through tears, and the softness in her face was more beautiful than the stars above them. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. It was a yes filled with trust, devotion, and a promise to face every tomorrow together. The mountain night suddenly felt brighter. He slowly stood up. Gently, lovingly, he placed the ring on her finger. The silver ring sparkled beneath the lights like a promise written by fate. As soon as the ring touched her hand, Diem broke down in tears and wrapped her arms around him. Toan held her close, as if he never wanted to let go. Around them, the field swayed softly in the night wind, and the lights shimmered like blessings from the heavens. The farm was no longer just a dream fulfilled. It had become the first page of their new life together. Under the mountain sky, surrounded by everything they had built with love and perseverance, two hearts finally became one forever. That night, after the tears, the laughter, and the promise that changed both of their lives forever, Toan and Diem stood quietly in the middle of the yard for a long moment. Neither of them wanted the moment to end. The mountain wind blew gently through the fields, carrying the sweet scent of fresh earth, flowers, and the cool night air. Above them, the stars seemed brighter than ever. Diem slowly lifted her hand, looking at the silver ring that now rested on her finger. Under the warm golden lights, it shimmered softly like a dream finally come true. Toan stood beside her, his hand still holding hers tightly, as if afraid this beautiful moment might disappear. Diem turned to him, tears still shining in her eyes, but this time her smile was brighter than the moonlight. "We really did it," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost trembling with happiness. "We finally have a home." Toan looked at the farmhouse, the fields, and the yard they had built together with years of sweat and sacrifice. Then he looked back at her. "No," he said gently. "We finally have a family." Those words made Diem's eyes fill with tears once again. She leaned into his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was warm, safe, familiar. For the first time in many years, both of them felt something they had long been searching for. Peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of finally knowing they no longer had to face life alone. That night, they stayed outside for a long time, sitting together on the wooden steps in front of the house. They talked about everything. The difficult days they had survived. The mistakes they had made. The dreams they once thought impossible. And now, those dreams stood right in front of them. Real. Beautiful. And filled with hope. As the night grew deeper, Toan gently wrapped a blanket around Diem's shoulders. The mountain air had become colder, but neither of them wanted to go inside yet. The moment was too beautiful. Diem rested her head softly on his shoulder as they looked out across the fields. The rows of vegetables moved gently in the wind, glowing beneath the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Toan smiled. "This is only the beginning." He pointed toward the land stretching beyond the fence. "One day, we'll expand the farm even more. We'll plant more herbs. Raise more animals. Build a bigger garden." Diem looked up at him with sparkling eyes. "And maybe," she smiled shyly, "a little room for our children?" Toan froze for a moment. Then a soft laugh escaped his lips. He turned to her, eyes filled with warmth. "Not just one room." He smiled lovingly. "A whole house filled with laughter." Diem laughed through happy tears. At that moment, the future no longer felt uncertain. It no longer felt distant. It was right there. In their hands. In the ring on her finger. In the home behind them. In the love they had built from nothing. The farm was no longer only land and wood. It had become a place where dreams could grow. A place where love could live. A place where tomorrow would always begin together. And beneath the endless mountain sky, with the stars shining above them, Toan and Ly Tu Diem quietly held each other close, knowing that the most beautiful chapter of their lives had only just begun.